key trembled in her gnarled fingers, slipping once, twice, as if her hands were testing her own courage. 20 years had etched themselves into her bones. Every creak of a joint, every gray strand in her hair a reminder of the life she had lost, of the world that had moved on without her. The street outside was silent, the winter air biting her cheeks, carrying the faint smell of smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Her house stood there, as if frozen in memory, windows fogged, the door a pale gray against the snow-dusted porch. She pressed the key into the lock and felt the metal bite back, the familiar click echoing like a heartbeat she hadn't heard in decades. She pushed the door open. The house was quiet, too quiet. Dust motes floated in the weak afternoon sun, but then a sound cut through the stillness, a soft, deliberate bark, low and cautious. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected company. And yet, there, in the middle of her living room, a German shepherd puppy, wide-eyed, wagging its tail, stared at her as if she were the one out of place. The key trembled in her fingers as if it had a life of its own, slipping once, twice, until she gripped it tightly, pressing it against the lock. 20 years had passed in prison, years measured in walls, barred windows, and footsteps that echoed endlessly along cold corridors. She had imagined this day countless times, standing at her doorstep, imagining the smell of her old home, the creak of the wooden floors, the faint scent of the garden that used to bloom outside her kitchen window. But now, with the winter wind biting at her cheeks and snow crunching under her worn shoes, the house looked smaller than she remembered, a shadow of the life she had lost. The door, pale and unadorned, seemed to be watching her, holding its breath, and she felt her own heart hammer in response. She pushed the key in, twisting slowly, listening to the familiar click, the metallic echo stirring memories like ghosts. The door swung open, and the smell hit her first. A mix of cold dust, old wood, and something unfamiliar, yet warm. It was the smell of life, and it startled her. She stepped inside cautiously, every footfall deliberate, the boards groaning under her weight, as if protesting the intrusion of her long absence. Light spilled through the dusty windows, illuminating motes that danced lazily in the still air. Her eyes swept across the living room, taking in the faint outline of furniture covered in sheets, the old rug faded and threadbare. It all seemed suspended in time, waiting for her, or maybe just waiting to be remembered. Then she heard it, a soft sound, deliberate yet hesitant, a tap-tap of small claws against the wooden floor. Her chest tightened. She wasn't expecting anyone. The sound grew closer, careful, almost measuring her reaction. She froze, her mind racing. Could someone have moved in? She hadn't heard voices, hadn't seen signs. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A shadow, small and fluid, emerging from behind the sofa. A German shepherd puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, stepped into the light. Its fur was a mottled mix of tan and black, soft and fluffy, ears too large for its head, tipping slightly to the side as it observed her. Its eyes were wide, shining with curiosity, intelligence, and something else she could not name. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe the echo of loneliness that mirrored her own. It froze when it saw her, body low, tail still, yet not retreating. She felt a strange tug in her chest, a stir of emotion she hadn't expected, shock, confusion, and an almost unbearable tenderness. For a moment, neither moved. She stared at it, the years pressing down like a weight on her shoulders, and it stared back, tilting its head slightly, whiskers trembling in the weak sunlight. Then, almost imperceptibly, the puppy took a step forward, its paw hesitant, as if testing whether this strange, gray-haired woman was friend or threat. Her lips parted, but no words came. She felt tears prick at her eyes, unbidden, hot and sudden, carrying decades of longing, regret, and an aching loneliness she hadn't realized she carried so heavily. She knelt slowly, hands trembling, and reached toward the creature. The puppy sniffed her fingers cautiously, tail giving a tiny, tentative wag. A laugh escaped her, soft and broken, the sound unfamiliar even to her own ears. The puppy's ears flicked at the sound, and it stepped closer, pressing its warm body against her legs. She felt the pulse of life beneath its small frame, the rapid, steady thrum of a heart beating in sync with her own. And in that moment, she realized that the house was not empty. It had waited, patiently, for this meeting, and in some strange, inexplicable way, it had prepared a companion for her return. The puppy circled her, sniffing, exploring, its confidence growing with every hesitant step. She watched, mesmerized, as it discovered the corners of her living room, the faded rug, the armchair she had once sat in, the fireplace cold and dark. It leapt onto the sofa cautiously, tail wagging. And she laughed again, this time louder, the sound echoing off the walls like a memory brought back to life. She knelt on the floor, reaching for a blanket to wrap around the trembling creature, and as she did, she noticed the puppy's eyes, large and dark, studying her with an intensity that startled her. It was not just curiosity, it was a kind of understanding, an awareness that she had not expected to find in such a small, young creature. For hours she sat on the floor, letting the puppy explore, feeding it scraps she found in the kitchen, murmuring quiet words she had not spoken to anyone in decades. Its tail wagged more freely now, its steps more confident, and slowly, the house seemed to exhale along with her, the oppressive silence lifting, replaced by the subtle rhythm of life, the scuff of paws on wood, the soft huff of warm breath, the occasional bark that startled her and made her heart soar. She found herself talking to it, telling it stories of the past, of the prison walls, of the years lost, and the puppy listened, tilting its head, ears flicking, eyes locked on hers, as if it could absorb every word, every ounce of emotion, every trembling pause. Night fell, and the light from the windows faded into a muted gray. The puppy curled against her legs, and she felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest, a slow, steady pulse of belonging. She realized then that this meeting was no accident, the house had waited, and so had the life within it. For the first time in 20 years, she felt the fragile stirrings of hope, fragile but insistent, like the first shoots of grass through frozen earth. The puppy slept lightly, ears twitching, tail occasionally flicking, and she closed her eyes beside it, letting exhaustion and relief wash over her in equal measure. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, carrying the cold and the loneliness she had known for so long. Inside, the house was warm with life, the small heartbeat of the puppy anchoring her to the present, reminding her that the past was no longer a prison. She had returned to her home, yes, but more importantly, she had returned to connection, to trust, to the simple, miraculous proof that even after years of absence, life could still surprise her, still fill the empty spaces with warmth, with companionship, with love. And in the quiet, as snow settled on the roof and the world outside carried on without pause, she made a promise to the small creature at her feet. She would not let it go, would not let it be lost, would not let the world steal this fragile miracle from her. The puppy stirred, eyes half closed, a soft nuzzle against her hand, and she whispered, "Welcome home." Morning came slowly, hesitant light slipping through the dusty curtains, illuminating the living room in pale gold. The puppy stirred first, nudging her hand with its cold, wet nose, tail wagging in a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the quiet house. She stirred too, still aching from the long night of emotions, every muscle stiff from a body unaccustomed to freedom, to hope, to life outside prison walls. She watched the puppy stretch and yawn, revealing tiny, sharp teeth that looked both dangerous and impossibly delicate, and felt a tender ache in her chest, a mix of fear and longing she hadn't realized she carried so heavily. She got to her feet slowly, every motion deliberate, the cold wooden floor biting at her bare ankles. The puppy bounded at her feet, ears flopping, eyes shining with eagerness, as if the simple act of moving together could stitch the house back into a home. She laughed softly, the sound fragile, a mixture of disbelief and joy, and extended her hand. The puppy sniffed, head tilting, and then leapt slightly, pressing its small body against her leg. It was tentative, wary of her touch yet seeking it at the same time. She knelt and let her hands glide through its fur, feeling the warmth of life she hadn't known for decades. Breakfast became a ceremony. She tore bread into small pieces, placing them on the floor, watching as the puppy devoured them with voracious enthusiasm. Its small body quivered with excitement, tail slapping the floor like a tiny metronome, and she smiled, realizing that she had never watched anything move with such pure, unself-conscious joy. There was no pretense, no judgment, only the honesty of instinct, and in that simplicity, she felt her own heart unclench slightly. She was learning again, as if the puppy had arrived not only to claim a home, but to teach her how to exist within it. The hours stretched, filled with tentative exploration. She walked slowly through each room, the puppy following, paws tapping lightly against the boards, sniffing corners, nudging objects, insisting that she notice the small details she had almost forgotten. A fallen book, a cracked teacup, the faint pattern of sunlight on the rug, they all became part of a shared map of discovery. Sometimes the puppy paused, ears flicking at a sound from outside, tail stiffed, then relaxed when she whispered soft reassurances. She realized that this tiny creature had a patience she had never possessed, a wisdom in its attention that made her consider the quiet ways in which trust could grow. By afternoon they had formed a fragile routine. The puppy learned to sit at her side, resting its head on her lap, and she learned to respond to its soft signals. Whines, nudges, subtle movements that conveyed far more than words ever could. She began to talk to it as if it could understand every nuance, recounting stories of her childhood, of the day she had left the house behind, of the long nights in prison where dreams had been her only solace. The puppy's head tilted, ears pricked, as though absorbing each word, its dark eyes wide and unblinking. And though she knew it could not speak, she felt conversations emerging, fragile threads of connection that filled the empty spaces left by years of isolation. The sun lowered, spilling warm amber light across the room, and she found herself laughing aloud for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The puppy leapt onto the sofa, sliding clumsily across cushions, barking with excitement, and she clapped her hands, delighted at the small absurdity of it all. She realized then that companionship wasn't about understanding fully or knowing perfectly. It was about presence, about being witnessed, about having a heartbeat beside yours that reminded you were not entirely alone. She had forgotten the quiet miracle of this simple truth, and now, through the soft nuzzle of a German shepherd puppy, she was relearning it. Evening brought reflection. She sat in the corner of the living room, the puppy curled at her feet, its warm body pressing against her calves. The faint crackle of the old fireplace, she had managed to coax a small flame from the damp wood, filled the room with an intimate glow, shadows flickering across the walls. She watched the puppy sleep lightly, ears twitching, tail occasionally flicking in dreams she could only imagine, and felt an unnameable ache and joy swell within her. She thought of the decades she had lost, the world outside that had carried on without her, and yet in this tiny creature, she saw the proof that life had not abandoned her entirely, that even in the quietest corners, in the spaces left hollow by absence, connection could still be forged. At night, she lay awake while the puppy slept at the foot of her bed. Its breathing was rhythmic, steady, a gentle lullaby of living presence. She ran her fingers along its soft fur, marveling at the warmth, the tiny heartbeat, the trust it offered without hesitation or expectation. It was an entirely different form of love, raw, simple, unwavering, and she felt her own heart softening in ways that had seemed impossible when she first turned the key in her door. She realized that this creature, so small and seemingly fragile, had become a mirror, reflecting back the compassion and courage she had buried under years of fear and regret. The night was silent outside, snow muffling the world beyond her home. Inside, the faint warmth of a life shared pulsed steadily, a reminder that even after decades of loss, the simplest bonds could rebuild entire worlds. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion take her, letting hope and connection wash through her. And in the quiet, as the puppy twitched in sleep and breathed softly against the wooden floor, she understood the fragile truth that would guide her in the days ahead, that even after so long, even after so much absence, life had not stopped, and love in its purest form could arrive in the unlikeliest of packages, a small, wide-eyed German shepherd puppy that had found its way into her heart and home. The days blurred together, each one marked by soft sunlight spilling through dusty windows and the rhythmic thump of paws against the wooden floor. The puppy had grown slightly, its fur richer in color, the timid flinches slowly replaced with small bursts of courage. Yet, even as life within the house began to bloom with warmth and motion, the shadows of the past pressed insistently against her heart. The house whispered to her, creaking boards and distant drafts echoing with memories she had long tried to bury. Every corner held a fragment of what had been: her mother's teacups, the faded rug where she had once danced in childhood, the window where she had watched snow fall 20 years ago. Now the silence of absence was broken only by the soft whine or excited bark of her small companion, a creature that seemed to know instinctively how to bridge the gap between memory and present. One afternoon, as she knelt on the floor brushing the puppy's thickening fur, a photograph fell from a shelf she had not disturbed in decades. The edges were yellowed, curling like autumn leaves, but the image was vivid: her younger self, smiling with her family, a father's hand resting gently on her shoulder, a dog she remembered from childhood standing loyally at her side. The sight struck her with the force of a tidal wave. She hadn't seen their faces in 20 years. The thought of what had been lost weighed heavily on her chest. The puppy, sensing her sudden stillness, nudged her hand, tail wagging in quiet insistence, grounding her in the now. Its eyes, wide and unwavering, seemed to say, "You are not alone." Nightfall brought unease. Memories rose like smoke from a long, extinguished fire, filling her room with the warmth of nostalgia and the sting of grief. Faces she had once loved now seemed distant and unreachable. She imagined the neighbors who had watched her go, the life she had abandoned, the years that had slipped through her fingers like sand. The puppy paced softly beside her, ears flicking at every shadow, tail low yet never straying far. It pressed its body against her leg repeatedly, a silent anchor, reminding her that she still had a place in the world, a connection that refused to let her sink entirely into despair. She began to wander the house with renewed awareness, tracing her fingers along walls, furniture, and windowsills, each touch stirring memories she hadn't expected to confront. The puppy followed, small paws tapping a steady rhythm, brushing against her ankles, leaning against her knees, a constant, living presence. In its movements she found patience and resilience mirrored back at her. She whispered to it in quiet tones, recounting the long nights in prison, the bitter loneliness, the endless waiting for a world that had moved on. Though it could not answer, it listened with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in decades. On the third evening, she found herself standing at the doorway, staring at the empty street. The wind carried a scent of smoke and distant rain, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine stepping outside, facing the eyes of those who had not known her absence was only one of circumstance, not of choice. The puppy nudged her, soft yet insistent, its warmth pressing against her calves. It was as if it understood her hesitation, offering courage without words, a small pulse of life reminding her that she could face the world, piece by trembling piece. She took a deep breath and returned inside, curling up on the sofa with the puppy nestled against her chest. The soft weight of its body, its rhythmic breathing, created a harmony with her own fragile heartbeat. She felt tears slip down her cheeks, warm and sudden, as decades of guilt, loss, and longing finally found a release. The puppy stirred lightly, nudging her chin with its cold nose, ears flicking, tail brushing against her arm as if to say, "We are here together, and that is enough." The world beyond the walls could wait. In this room, life had reasserted itself in the simplest, most profound way. Days became a rhythm of small reconnections. She fed the puppy, bathed it, trained it with gentle persistence, and in return, it gave her trust, devotion, and moments of sheer joy that made her laugh until her chest ached. Yet the shadows never fully lifted. Each time she moved through the house, she felt the absence of her past life keenly. The empty spaces where loved ones had once been. The unoccupied chairs, the untouched garden. Sometimes she would sit in the quiet, the puppy curled at her feet, and imagine what might have been, allowing herself the grief she had long suppressed. And every time the puppy would look up at her, eyes steady, almost solemn, as if reminding her that grief and hope could coexist, that the past could be honored without erasing the present. One afternoon, she discovered the backyard, overgrown with weeds, the fence leaning and battered by years of neglect. The puppy bolted ahead, sniffing and bounding through the wild grass, ears flopping, tail wagging like a banner of newfound freedom. She followed slowly, letting the sun warm her back, marveling at the simplicity of the moment. Together, they explored the corners of the yard, uncovering remnants of a past life, a forgotten swing, rusted and still, a flower bed where tulips had once bloomed. The puppy pawed at the earth, digging lightly, scattering clumps of soil, and she laughed, the sound raw and unpracticed. The act felt like reclamation, a small victory over the weight of absence and time. Night came again, silent and deep. She sat on the porch steps, the puppy resting its head on her knee, looking up at her with trust and expectation. The wind carried the faint scent of distant rain and damp earth, and the house behind them seemed less like a tomb of memory and more like a home awakening to life. She realized that in this tiny creature, she had found a companion who bridged the chasm of her isolation, who offered love without judgment, courage without demand. The shadows of the past were still there, but they no longer held dominion. With each paw step, each nuzzle, each trusting glance, the puppy was teaching her that life could move forward, even from the deepest wells of loss. She whispered to the night, to the empty street, and to the small living warmth beside her, "We will be okay. We will learn again. We will not be alone." The puppy lifted its head, ears twitching, tail flicking softly, and pressed its body closer against hers, as if in agreement. In that quiet moment, Surrounded by shadows yet buoyed by presence, she understood that connection could heal even the oldest wounds, that life, in its simplest forms, had a resilience she had long forgotten, and together she and the German shepherd puppy faced the night, small but unbroken, ready to reclaim not just a house, but the fragile pulse of living itself. Morning arrived like a quiet promise, sunlight spilling across the living room and illuminating the layers of dust in golden beams. The puppy had grown noticeably since her first day back, its fur thickening, its movements more assured, its eyes carrying a confidence that seemed to reflect back at her own slowly building courage. She watched it chase shadows across the floor, ears flopping, tail high, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in decades: anticipation. The world outside still held fear and uncertainty, but within the walls of her home, life had begun to pulse again, guided by the small, living heartbeat at her feet. They ventured into the backyard, now fully aware of the wild growth that had overtaken what used to be her garden. The puppy darted through the weeds, nose to the ground, ears twitching at every sound. It bounded over fallen branches, dug lightly in soft soil, and rolled in the sun-warmed grass. She followed slowly, careful of her own unsteady steps, laughing at its unrestrained joy. Every movement, every wag, every leap reminded her of the simple, vital rhythm of living, the courage to move forward, even when the ground beneath her felt uncertain. The puppy had no fear, and somehow its courage seeped into her, easing the tight coil of anxiety that had lodged in her chest since her return. By midday they were walking along the narrow street that had once been familiar. The houses were different now, some gone, some rebuilt, others abandoned. The puppy stayed close, occasionally darting ahead to sniff a tree or greet a passing passerby. Tail wagging, ears perked, she hesitated at the edge of the street, uncertainty freezing her in place. Faces of neighbors who had known her before flickered in her mind. Strangers now with the weight of 2 decades between them. The puppy nudged her hand gently with its cold nose, pressing against her leg, and she realized it was offering her the simplest form of bravery: companionship. She exhaled slowly and took a step forward. Then another. With each step, the small creature beside her transformed her fear into momentum, its silent presence a bridge to a world she had thought she had lost. The afternoon was a series of small triumphs. The puppy trotted ahead confidently, ears upright, tail sweeping in arcs of unrestrained delight. Children on the street paused to watch, some reaching out to pet it, and she allowed herself a hesitant smile. The puppy nudged her forward, guiding her into conversations with neighbors who had once passed her by, teaching her, without words, that connection did not have to be terrifying. In its boundless enthusiasm and unjudging presence, she discovered a kind of courage that was not loud or heroic. It was steady, persistent, and quietly insistent. It was the courage to exist again, to trust, to belong. Evening settled softly, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples. The puppy curled at her feet as she tended the small fire in the living room, shadows flickering across walls lined with the memories of decades past. She reflected on the day, marveling at the bravery she had discovered within herself, a bravery mirrored in the tiny, living creature she had grown to depend on. Its eyes followed her every movement, its head tilting occasionally, as if reminding her that courage could be shared, that it need not be borne alone. The simplest acts, holding a hand, offering trust, venturing outside, had become profound lessons in resilience. Night brought a hush over the house, the kind of silence that feels both fragile and protective. She sat on the sofa, the puppy resting its head on her lap, warm body pressing against her knees. The wind outside rattled faintly against the windows, but within, the house seemed to hum with quiet life. She whispered to the puppy, recounting small victories, moments of doubt she had overcome, and the tiny triumphs of courage she had never expected to reclaim. Its ears flicked, tail brushing softly against her leg, eyes locking on hers in a gaze that demanded nothing but presence. And in that gaze she understood a truth she had not known in years. Courage was not measured by grand acts or public recognition. It was measured in the quiet persistence of showing up, of moving forward, of allowing oneself to be vulnerable. She recalled the nights in prison, the walls pressing in, the cold and loneliness, the endless waiting. She remembered the fear that had once made the world feel impossible, the dread of every unknown, every step beyond her control. And now, in the warmth of her home, with the puppy's steady weight beside her, those fears seemed distant, softened by the rhythm of living, by the tangible, unspoken promise that she was not alone. The creature's presence had become a compass, guiding her through the labyrinth of uncertainty, teaching her that connection could ignite courage, and that bravery could bloom from trust, companionship, and love. Late into the night, she wandered the house again, checking doors and windows, straightening objects, and the puppy trailed closely behind, its small body brushing against her legs, paws scuffing the floor lightly. She imagined the years ahead, filled with challenges and the need for resilience, and felt a spark of anticipation rather than dread. The puppy's energy and devotion had rekindled something in her, a willingness to step forward, to meet the world again with gentle courage. It was a lesson written not in words but in trust, loyalty, and the silent communication of a living, breathing bond. Finally, she settled in the living room once more, the puppy curling against her chest as she wrapped a thin blanket around them both. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of traffic, the faint echo of a world moving on, but inside, life had taken root again. The house no longer felt like a relic of absence. It felt like a place of beginning, of rediscovery, of quiet bravery shared between two souls. She stroked the puppy's fur, feeling the warmth seep into her hands, into her heart, and she realized that courage was not about facing the world alone. It was about allowing love, companionship, and trust to guide the way. And as the night deepened, she whispered softly, almost to herself, almost to the creature that had become her teacher, her anchor, her companion. "We are brave, together. We can face anything." The puppy shifted slightly, nudging her hand with its nose, tail flicking in affirmation, and she felt, with a quiet, profound certainty, that the path forward would not be walked alone. In the shared rhythm of breaths, of warmth, of presence, she discovered the simple, enduring truth. Courage lived not in the absence of fear, but in the steadfast companionship of those who stand beside you, paw by trembling paw. Spring arrived quietly, brushing the world outside with soft green and golden light. The snow had melted from the roof and garden, leaving the air sweet with the scent of damp earth and the faint perfume of early blooms struggling to break through the soil. Inside, the house no longer smelled of dust and absence. It carried warmth, life, and the subtle, constant rhythm of a small heartbeat. The German Shepherd puppy, now taller, stronger, more assured in its movements, bounded through the rooms with energy that seemed inexhaustible. Its ears flicked at every sound, tail sweeping in arcs of joy, eyes bright with the delight of freedom. She followed slowly, savoring the laughter that bubbled unexpectedly from her throat, the ease with which the house now felt like a home once more. The backyard had been reclaimed, too, each overgrown corner now a place of discovery. The puppy darted through the weeds, rolling in the soft earth, occasionally leaping into the air to chase sunlight or the shadow of a bird. She watched from the porch steps, arms folded, feeling the ache of years melted away by the simple joy of witnessing life. The house, the yard, even the street beyond seemed different now, softened by the lens of presence and participation. She no longer approached the world with the tremor of hesitation, but with measured curiosity. Guided by the creature whose trust had demanded nothing but offered everything. She ventured outside more often, letting the puppy lead the way through the familiar streets that had grown strange with time. Neighbors paused to greet her, some faces worn, some new, and the puppy's presence acted as an unspoken ambassador, bridging the distance of decades. Children reached out to pet it, laughter spilling into the air, and she realized that the world had not forgotten her. It was simply waiting for her to step back into it. The puppy nudged her hand gently, reminding her that courage and connection walked together. With every step, every interaction, every wag of its tail, the house and her heart expanded, making space for life once more. Inside, she rebuilt her routines slowly, deliberately. The kitchen, once cold and empty, now echoed with the soft clatter of bowls and the excited patter of paws. She fed the puppy, brushed its thickening coat, and trained it with patience, her own movements careful yet confident. The creature responded with eagerness, rolling, leaping, and nuzzling, never demanding but always offering affirmation. In its loyalty, she found mirrors of forgiveness, courage, and love she had thought lost to her years behind bars. It became a teacher, a companion, and a reminder that life could be reclaimed. One small, deliberate step at a time. Evenings were the most profound. She would sit in the living room, the puppy curled at her feet, soft warmth pressing against her legs, shadows dancing across the walls from the fireplace she had coaxed to life. She whispered stories of her childhood, of the years lost, of the hopes that had flickered and nearly died in confinement. The puppy listened, eyes wide, ears pricked, head occasionally tilting as if absorbing every word. She realized that love and presence could exist in forms beyond human comprehension, that a small, living creature could carry the weight of memory, hope, and renewal, simply by being. One particular night, as the moonlight spilled across the floor, she noticed the puppy staring intently at the doorway. Following its gaze, she saw a faint shadow of movement, a cat wandering the street, curious yet cautious. The puppy's tail wagged in soft arcs, ears flicking, body poised for the moment. She laughed quietly, marveling at the way it approached the world with curiosity and courage, teaching her anew that life could be met with wonder instead of fear. She knelt, running her hand through its fur, and whispered, "We are safe now. We have found our home." The puppy pressed its nose against her palm, eyes gleaming in the moonlight, and she felt a swell of something she hadn't known she could feel again: completion. The house, once a monument to absence, now thrummed with vitality. The garden began to bloom, tentative shoots rising through the soil, and the puppy explored every corner with unabashed delight. She watched it chase sunlight, roll in the grass, and bound along the wooden floors, its energy and joy infusing the walls with life. She realized that the home she had returned to was no longer the same house she had left behind. It had grown with her, reshaped by connection, trust, and the love of a small, living companion who had insisted, silently and insistently, that life could begin again. By the end of spring, she felt a quiet transformation within herself. The fears that had once gripped her at every step had softened. She laughed freely, cried without shame, and allowed herself to imagine a future unburdened by the shadows of the past. And through it all, the puppy remained her anchor, constant and unwavering, a reminder that even in the face of lost time, companionship could illuminate the darkest corners. She had returned to her house after 20 years, yes, but more importantly, she had returned to herself, guided by the warmth and trust of a small creature whose loyalty knew no bounds. The final evening arrived with a stillness that felt sacred. The puppy lay across her lap, paws draped over her knees, breathing softly, ears flicking in dreams. She held it gently, pressing her cheek to its soft fur, feeling the rhythm of its heartbeat and her own intertwine. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth, the world alive and waiting. Inside, the house hummed with warmth, with presence, with life reclaimed. She whispered to the night, to the quiet streets, to the puppy that had changed everything. "We are home. We are safe. We are here." The puppy shifted slightly, pressing closer, tail flicking lazily, eyes half closed in trust and contentment. And she understood, with a clarity that made her chest ache with gratitude, that home was not a building nor a collection of objects frozen in memory. It was a heartbeat, a presence, a shared warmth, a love that refused to let the world slip away. In the living room, flooded with soft moonlight, she and the German shepherd puppy had reclaimed not just a house, but the fragile, enduring pulse of life itself. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt completely, undeniably